A new cover story for the Atlantic September 2022 issue. Staff writer Caitlin Dickerson lays out in great detail an investigative report into former President Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy. The article exposes the trauma that families separated by U.S. immigration officials are experiencing, and 4 years later, some of these families are still separated. Joining me now to discuss, Caitlin Dickerson, staff writer for The Atlantic, and Dr. Ranit Mishori, senior medical advisor with Physicians for Human Rights and professor of family medicine at Georgetown University School of Medicine, are both here. Thank you, ladies, for being here. Caitlin, I'd love to start with you. You say that separating children from their families at the border was not a side effect of this immigration policy, but actually the intent. What evidence do you have for that?
Well, the evidence for that begins in 2014 when the proposal to separate families is first surfaces. And that's when Barack Obama was president. A man named Tom Homan, who was the head of ICE, he saw a rise in border crossings, in particular of children and families crossing the border. And he told me on the record for my story that he came up with this idea to try separating families as a way to discourage border crossing. The Obama administration rejected the plan initially, and then Homan raised it again under President Trump, when, of course, it was ultimately approved. So this argument that prosecutions were the goal and not separations during the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy, it just doesn't hold up based on Tom Homan's arguments and Tom Homan's interviews with me, as well as many documents that I uncovered in the course of my investigation. I was involved in a multi-year lawsuit to get federal records, which show kind of before, during, and after zero tolerance that separation was, in fact, the goal, and go as far as to show officials trying to keep families apart for even longer after those prosecutions of parents were complete.
And I know that Homan told you that the intent was not what ended up happening. The intent, he thought, was to help these families, to deter them from the danger that is border crossing. But you detail some harrowing stories of the impact on these families. So, Dr. Mishori, I want to go to you. What happens physically, mentally, when you separate a child from their parents like this?
So first of all, I'd like to congratulate Caitlin for this unbelievable and remarkable investigation, which reaffirms what we at Physicians for Human Rights concluded about 2 years ago, that this intentionality is one of the criteria for international law to determine that something is considered torture. So intentionality, and of course, as you mentioned right now, the severe pain and suffering that family separation can cause, among other elements. So as you can imagine, anyone who has children, you are separated from them, they get lost in the mall. It's profoundly stressful. Imagine children being yanked away from you. You don't know where they are. The children know where the parents are. So we documented our volunteer physicians at Physicians for Human Rights. We documented, we interviewed people, more than 40 families at one round, more than 13 on another at another time. The profound, severe, and long-lasting trauma that lasted even 3 to 4 years after the initial separation.
And so, Caitlin, you say in the article that a lot of different entities share blame for these family separations and that this goes back to 9/11. So can you walk us through how we got here?
Sure. So following 9/11, the George W. Bush administration established the Department of Homeland Security with the goal of preventing a terrorist attack from ever taking place again on American soil. But as part of that effort, they really turned toward illegal border crossing, which at the time mostly involved migrant laborers, who were sending money back to their families in Mexico, and decided that, no longer should that be allowed to go unpunished. And so there wasn't a significant threat of terrorism then or now among these migrant laborers. But basically what you've seen over time since 9/11 is an escalation of this approach known as prevention by deterrence, which uses prosecution as a way to discourage people from entering the United States. Initially, when it's introduced under President George W. Bush, it's only applied toward individual border crossers, individual adults who are coming across the border alone, most often men, again, migrant laborers. But as you see the rise that we just talked about of children and families crossing the border, and you have President Trump take office, who, as you know, campaigned and was very focused on minimizing border crossings of all kinds, you see those same prosecution efforts placed on parents which then requires them to be separated from their children.
Now, Caitlin, you say what happened here has resonance far beyond this one policy and that it should be studied by future generations. Why? What is it that you think we have to learn from this that transcends beyond even just immigration?
I think that it's no surprise that people like Stephen Miller, President Trump's well-known chief immigration advisor, the president himself, Jeff Sessions, who served as attorney general, these are all folks who were very open about espousing, very harsh views on immigration and favoring harsh enforcement. But really what's more important, I think, here perhaps is all of the people, the members of the bureaucracy who stood by as this policy was put into place, many of whom say today, they were concerned about it when it was in the proposal phase. They didn't want it to be pushed forward, and yet they remained quiet. They didn't push back. Some of them told me, it wouldn't have been strategic for my career, and they were very open about that, to push back against Stephen Miller, given how much influence he had in the White House. Others simply said, they figured this idea was so outlandish, there's no way it would ever be put into place, when in fact, it actually fell to them they were empowered and had the authority to push back, and they didn't. And this is what happened. And that's why I feel like there's a much broader and a more widely applicable lesson here.
So what's happening now with these remaining children who still haven't been reunited with their parents?
These families are still struggling, and the vast majority of these children have been released from federal custody. They're no longer being detained, so they're in the care of sponsors, some of whom were extended family members, maybe even family friends. But at this point, these kids have spent years apart from their parents. And even those who have been reunited are still struggling very seriously. And so you can only imagine, kids who spent 4 years apart from their parents right now having a really hard time, both the adults and the children.
I have so many more questions for both of you, but unfortunately we are out of time. Dr. Mishori, Caitlin, thank you both. And Caitlin, thank you for this report.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.